On. And we are recording with Mr. Leo Zagami, who I believe this is your fourth time on here. First time we kind of just talked about anything and everything. Second time we talked about Confessions of Illuminati, Volume 7, which is your newest book, which will be in the description as always. The second time we talked about Volume 6.66 about Cyber Satan, and now we're talking about Volume 5. And I wanted to ask you, and I guess I'll just let you take it away. What should I be, because I've been meditating every day since 2008, and reading Volume 5 now makes me think that I should be wary of what I'm doing and what I'm going into there with. What do I need to know because I think there are great benefits to meditation. I think there's great benefits to praying, but as you've pointed out multiple times in your book, it's a two-way door. There are nefarious entities that don't have your best intentions, but will masquerade as positive. They're not going to come to you in the form of a demon. They're going to come to you in the form of love and light. What advice would you give to someone that meditates every day? And then I guess take it from there, Mr. Zagami.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a matter of not opening to certain entities, certain realms that are difficult to really control. And we know that the realms of dreams is what the shamans call to see, but it's also known, like I wrote, by the way, also not only in Volume 5, but also in Volume 7, that shamans at times, especially certain kind of shamans, but we can say most shamans are inclined to not really choose to be on a side. They kind of mingle in that gray area in which you can have forces that at time can be very dangerous. So I would suggest personally to not cultivate that kind of practice. Having said that, of course, there is people that feel calm and quiet and they feel more balanced when they do meditation and they follow at times what is known as the core of the philosophy of yoga. But like I explained in Volume 5, very much, it's about opening to certain forces, and the fact that you are breathing in and breathing out, and you are doing it in a certain way, and you are maintaining, of course, certain images in your head. Is definitely something that slides into the dream state, and at that point you are of course not any longer in control. You might slip into what is lucid dreaming, and dream control is something that I mean, it's not an easy thing to master. The truth is that a dream is never just a dream, like I say in Volume 5 of my Confessions. It is a sacred space of multidimensional possibilities. And so I think that the rewards of meditation might not really be enough to justify this taking this risk. Because we are in a state in which you can have, of course, contact with the angelic realm, but you can also have preventively contact with demons and elementals alike. And so I think it's necessary to understand that in the esoteric world, and I explain this, of course, in the book that we are discussing today, certain people, and in the case of my own experience, I describe in Volume 5 the experience with Master Azot in my late 20s and early 30s while I was living in Norway. Master Azot, which I also cite, by the way, also in Volume 1 of my Confessions, and also in volume 6.66, you see in the opening a citation from him. It's called Nikolai Fritzbold. That's his real name. And so it was illuminating for me to learn about certain things, but it was also very scary at times to understand that they can truly cause harm and even death into somebody that doesn't have the means of protecting himself. So I would say that that we need to be very careful of the state of dreaming and of the state of lucid dreaming, and of course of meditation that might induct and bring us to that point. So it's really about knowing and having self-awareness to the point in which you are comfortable in that state. The strength of meditation can be also addressed, I guess, at good or evil. And I actually talk about that also in the context of another topic which I discuss in this book, which is connected to a certain kind of Jewish mysticism and Rabbi Chikatila, which basically is a character which I discuss in volume 5, in connection also with the use of sexual magic also, which is of course less known to us, which are of course accustomed mostly with, when it comes to sexual magic, the work of Crowley, the work maybe of his predecessor Pascal Randolph, or maybe at that point we need to understand that they are not really the originators of all this, that it was in the Sabbatean Frankist world that this kind of things manifested first, and that's why I wanted to include the work of Rabbi, of this Rabbi, which it's a very influential Rabbi, but at the same time also another perspective regarding sexual magic and the ambivalence of certain occult practices, which can be used both in a good way or in a bad way. So the meditative powers come from an accomplishment of yourself in an initiatic setup in which you have learned to protect and aim in the right direction your energies, your thoughts. If you are not capable of doing that, it's extremely dangerous. So I think that I gave you an idea, and hopefully I gave you also a warning that might be useful not only to you, but also to other people that unfortunately, when they are experimenting with the yoga methods involving mantras, meditation, and visualization, often leave the path, which is basically a path that wants you to bring calmness and awareness and peace in your life, and end up instead being compromised psychically. And so some people close to me have decided to stop the practice of meditation because it was simply too dangerous. They were opening up a can of worms, and they didn't want to do so. They didn't think they were capable of controlling what was opened.
Now, could you say that there's a side of it? So one thing I started doing is when I was younger, I prayed a lot. And then I was an atheist for like 10, 15 years. But I've been praying for the last 2 years or so, and I've actually combined the practice of praying and meditation. Is it less dangerous if you go about it that way? I mean, I've been doing it long enough. I have had wonderful experiences. I've had negative experiences. But is there a way to almost combine the two to because it will.
No, it's not a question of combine. It's a question of you and where you stand. I mean,
Okay.
it's like these practices come from mostly from an East Indian tantric alchemy tradition, which is very distant from our own tradition, first of all. So in a Judeo-Christian setup, these practices often are seen by the traditional Christians as being, of course, dangerous. They are not always dangerous, but the problem is that in the present culture that we have, in which many occultists, and I cite, for example, the Cult of the Lamb of Kenneth Grant and his successor Michael Staley. When you read the book, you saw it yourself. Because I think that their example it's a typical example of people who are drawn towards what they then defined as an alien world, an extra-dimensional world in which then they became involved. As you know, I also wrote and published another book called Invisible Master, which I also direct people to read in the course of Volume 5 while I'm addressing this subject, because also in the Invisible Master, I dealt very in depth, in a very in-depth way in this alien, extra-dimensional, interdimensional world. And also in Volume 1 of my confession, I kind of try to indicate who are the players. But of course, when it comes down to the practices, as you know, Volume 5 is mostly addressed to those people who claim they're practicing alchemy, both in the past as in the present. Now, in the present, I don't see these great alchemists. I see a lot of confused people that make use of these techniques, also like meditation. And the problem is that they are gambling in stuff that an Illuminati sorcerer that identifies you and wants to harm you can then have an easy entrance in your life, and can very easily ruin it. So it's like just putting yourself a little bit at risk if you don't have those protection. And the protection comes really from a blind faith that doesn't really require any meditation. It's just about being in connection with God and believing that He is the answer to all our problems. So I understand that today there has been here in the Western world a oversimplification of the meditation practice. And I think that for this reason, the philosophy of yoga has been also misinterpreted, because from something that comes from the sacred realm is being commercialized in something that is basically, you know, I mean, it's like we let's go to do Pilates, let's go to do yoga, let's go to do whatever. And in all this, we have, of course, the New Age. And in this book, as you know, I criticize firmly the New Age movement. And at the same time, I try to make people understand how the diabolical New Age movement is part of this corruption of the Western initiatic system. And in fact, this book actually has a very specific title. You see, I mean, it's not like here I show it for all our viewers, of course, who are watching us. The Decline of the West and the Rise of Satanism in Our Society. Now, this book was initially published.
Yeah, you got attacked for, right? You got attacked as like they tried to shut it down through censorship.
Yes, there was basically an attempt to remove from circulation this book, which I managed to stop, but was a legal attempt made by the Ordo Templi Orientis. The book was originally called The Decline of the Western Initiatic System. It was basically not included in the confession series because I was experimenting, because I was trying to publish for the first time a book independently using Amazon, and my are self-made because I put it together with my wife, publishing company called Cursum Perficio, and then I immediately incurred in a problem which I thought would be the end of the short-lived publishing house, which was just taking off. Instead, I identified the problem immediately. I thought, okay, these people can only remove this book if they have some kind of legal issue. And the legal issue by the legal team of the Ordo Templi Orientis, which I remind is a sect, a paramasonic sect that was taken over by Aleister Crowley and founded originally in Austria and Germany in the early 1900s. The work basically that I did was exposing some symbols that were basically put together recently by the Ordo Templi Orientis within their academy, their frame of work. And nowadays, these symbols are copyrighted. And of course, when you have a copyright issue, that makes it a legal issue. And then at that point, I said, okay, if that's probably that's going to be the only way they can remove this book, if they have some kind of legal grounds where they can battle it. So I removed those symbols or images that might have been copyrighted, as well as any citation that they might claim was copyrighted, because what they did was in the 90s, they waged a legal war against the people. Actually, Crowley had given his, not his estate, unfortunately, because his estate went to the state of England because he went bankrupt. He went bankrupt, he had a court battle, he lost. And then at that point, they went to the courts, like it often happens, take control of your estate. After the death of Aleister Crowley, that estate stayed in a state of limbo until the 90s, in which they started to feel strong enough to wage court battles against anybody that was using Crowley's writings. And this legal battle went on until the early 2000s, in which in the end they won in England. That made it possible. Was made possible because what they did was very clever. Before even waging any legal war that they might have lost, they actually went to the state and bought Crowley's bankrupt estate for a very little sum of money. And then on top of that, they built their whole case from the reputation of the order, the connections that it had in the past with Crowley, and so on. Of course, all this was moved behind the scenes by people who wanted to have control over Crowley's writings because they deemed them important in this moment of time. Now, as you know, I write very much about Crowley, not only about the OTO, but also about the AA, which is another order that he created, and an order inspired by supposed secret chiefs and so on. Let's remember, though, that all this New Age movement that Crowley was involved with is the same New Age movement that we are all involved in. I mean, not involved, but at least we tend to minimize the fact that the New Age movement comes from the Theosophical Society, from a Theosophical Society background that without Madame Blavatsky and the initial launch of this Theosophical Society, we will probably never arrive to the complex construct of secret societies that Crowley and others then built up. because what happened was, and not only Crowley, Crowley was probably one of the last people, because let's remember, and I talk about it also in volume 7 of my Confessions, very much all the theosophical milieu of Austria that influenced so much the birth of Ariosophy, of all that anti-Semitic rubbish that formed the ideology, the early ideology of Adolf Hitler, who was Austrian, who was actually in contact with these people. And I explained who they were. And I explained even how Franz Hartmann inspired through one of his publications of the swastika as a symbol of national socialism. So we know that, of course, Nazism, like even communism, these are ideologies that behind the scenes have been aided and abetted by certain secret societies. In the case of Nazism, it was the Thule Gesellschaft founded in 1919 by Rudolf von Sembotendorf, known as the Thule Society. And then that was, of course, something inspired by the Sabbatean Frankists in Turkey, in Salonico. But going back to the fact that the Theosophical Society is the main inspirator for people like, for example, Michael Aquino.
Yeah, the satanic U.S. Army colonel, right?
Yes,
Out of the Temple of Set.
Yes. So the New Age phenomena that kind of springs out of this, it's at the heart of the modern rebirth of magic with a K, because we always distinguish magic from magic with a K, which is, of course, including everything that is truly occult. And I actually talk, for example, I even cite in my book Jimmy Savile, for example, during his lifetime was a deviant witch and pedophile who you can now learn more even by watching documentaries on TV that come up now, quite revealing ones even. But he was very much connected, as we all know, also with the royal family. In my book, volume 5, I do depict a whole scenario of how these various secret societies, in one way or another, got corrupted and ended up being taken over by what we define as Christians as Satanists. Now, we define them as Satanists, but if you go and talk with these people, they don't have the same kind of definition, because they define themselves as pagan. They define themselves as, no, but we are Gnostic. So we are, I don't know what. I mean, they kind of are very much into not wanting to admit that even Aleister Crowley was himself a Satanist. That I explained from volume 1 of my Confessions onwards, that, I mean, if you write an hymn to Satan, you are clearly a Satanist. If you publish an hymn to Satan on your website, you're clearly a satanic organization. But of course, if you talk with these people, they will tell you, no, it's much more complex. Crowley didn't really believe in the devil. He had a much more complex belief system. Okay, but even Michael Aquino that we just cited, who, by the way, I used to be in contact with personally, and really? I explained that in volume 2 of my Confessions, and of course I also published one of his emails, letters to me, I think, that actually admits very clearly that he was very much promoting the Theosophical Society. So I mean, this is not like theories and just thrown there by people who read some books and don't really know what they're talking about. I talk by a direct experience, because I, at one point myself, was a member of the Theosophical Society of Pasadena in London. There is 2 ramifications of the Theosophical Society present in London, and I was active in one of them for a brief period of time. But I learned a lot from being inside the Theosophical Society myself. So I think that is important that then people understand that thanks to this milieu, this group of people internationally united by a society, the Theosophical Society, that really, for the first time, kind of mixed the ancient philosophies of the East, the West, and put them all together. Also reevaluating and advocating almost a defense for the figure of Lucifer, which was the title of the first publication of Madame Blavatsky. So kind of like, let's bring back Lucifer and let's try to make him cool again. Let's make Lucifer great again. I mean, it was a bit like that. And at the same time, though, in my book, I dedicate also some pages to mental alchemy, which is another very important topic. And so this book is not really a book that is open for those who are not really a little bit at least knowledgeable of the esoteric world, or interested in it at least, because you can read volume 7, volume 6.66 without necessarily being an esoterist or somebody else. This book here, volume 5, instead is a book that demands either your complete attention, or either at least some knowledge of the esoteric world, and then you will understand the magic of self-will that the Egyptians practiced in the days of Moses, and at least from what they say, from what these people say, from their perception, and from very rare publications which I included for the first time in the English language, like, for example, the rare publication of Marianne Atwood dedicated to this, to what is really mental alchemy. And if you go and study the writings that I published in that sense, we can say that a lot of this work, though I don't openly reference as such, it's really the fruit of the enormous influence of the Sabbatean Frankists, or of the group that from the beginning seem to have corrupted the Jewish world, the Erev Rav, which is a group of, it was basically included in the Egyptian tribes that participated to the Exodus, but according to the Jewish tradition, they were not really Jewish. They were Egyptian magicians that were accepted by Moses as an integral part of the people, but became problematic the moment in which the Erev Rav started to go back to their pagan practices in front of a leader, Moses, who of course was pointing on communication with God and with a monotheistic kind of idea to his people, that then became, of course, the people of Israel once they arrived to the Holy Land. So the Erev Rav is Israel's greatest enemy for some people, and rabbis who are well-versed seem to say that the Erev Rav is actually the origins of the whole Sabbatean Frankist concept. So I think that this gives you an idea that maybe this has been an infiltration all along in Judaism, just like we had many infiltrations in Christianity. There is, of course, a very interesting text, citations and texts, ancient texts, which I bring together in this book. So it is definitely a book with some wisdom in it that makes us understand also the hermetical garden, if we want to call it that way, the magical keys of all these people who are initiated into these groups, which I describe really in this diagram, this which basically shows us how the Western initiatic system really operates and how it's divided, the external, the profane world. Then the first level, it's the Blue Lodges of Freemasonry, which not necessarily extremely esoteric, but is a first level of esoteric that we encounter. Then we have a high level of Freemasonry, people who maybe are well versed with the various rites of Freemasonry, who go beyond the third degree and beyond the Blue Lodges into the so-called rites of perfection. They can go into the ancient Accepted Scottish Rite, but there's many others also, even more esoteric ones like the Memphis and Mizraim, or more inclined to the royal art of alchemy, like the Swedish Rite, for example, which is a very particular rite. And then we have, of course, the Rosicrucians. And the Rosicrucians also have been commercialized, over-commercialized, and become corrupt in the way they were over-commercialized. So I also tend to say that and to show how the various degrees of Amorc work out, and how Amorc itself it's criticized, and it's also a manipulation that has made definitely more known the whole subject of Rosicrucianism, but it's not a really real Rosicrucianism when you have millions of people that simply follow correspondence courses without really a real connection. So I wanted, though, to say all these things in a book. I wanted to explain also a little bit more about Amorc, which is based in San Jose, California, but is now really actually in the last few years more and more present. Even the headquarters are here, but in reality, the leadership has moved back to Europe, because it was the founder of Amorc, who was, by the way, connected also with the OTO and with the same group of people that Aleister Crowley was connected. So we go back to what I said at the beginning. All these people come from the theosophical background that basically, and that's why in my book, I wrote a chapter that you might have read, that do pseudo-Rosicrucians hold the key to hidden knowledge? So do these pseudo-Rosicrucians that sprang out of the work of Harvey Spencer Lewis, who died in 1939, and who started, by the way, this adventure after being an honorary member of the OTO, a group that was considered an amity with Amorc. But regardless of the OTO connection, I explain if there is really some true knowledge worth learning from the secret doctrine of these kind of Rosicrucian, these modern Rosicrucian fraternities. And so I wanted to analyze this concept a little bit more, as well as, of course, also explaining the very roots of occult Freemasonry, the roots of certain branches of the Illuminati that have always talked, and Freemasonry that, by the way, like, for example, strict temple observance, that always talked about unknown superiors of some kind. And so here I become, of course, a little bit of an historian in this case, and I go into the explanation of who these people are, who aspire the concept, for example, of unknown superior. In that case, a Polish guy called Michael Saint-Gevoux, and then there was also another important figure within Freemasonry called Baron Chaudy, who wrote a very important book that was published in 1766 called L'Étoile Flamboyante. et la société et les francs-maçons considéraient tous les aspects. Now, it might seem boring though for the common folk, but these things have some importance, because the people who ruled a society for hundreds of years gave them importance. So by, for example, publishing a short catechism done in a lodge, a catechism on alchemy. What is a catechism? A catechism is basically a teaching that the Freemason, the adept in this kind of secret society receives, with a questionnaire which is basically answered by the adept, but the answer is already given by the adept. So this catechism basically is simply reading these answers, so you can make them yours and lend them. Often such proceedings are memorized so that the person will have a more clever understanding. Now, while today Freemason is not really, I mean, if not in certain rites and really, let's see, it's kind of, lately it's starting to recover some elements of their connection with alchemy, because Freemason is basically an alchemical procedure. What does it mean, an alchemical procedure? It means the transformation of man. And so you know, all the symbolism that we find in a lodge. So you have basically the rough ashlar, and then become the perfect ashlar, and then you have basically the compass, the square, but then you have all the other symbolic elements. I have here, maybe I can show you some of them. If you wait a second, I can show you. Sure. Because there is this. Just a second. No.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Now, here we are. This is a miniature, though. This, of course, this is more symbolic. I mean, it is, of course, these are all elements which are used in a traditional lodge. Basically, a traditional lodge of mostly of the Anglo-Saxon tradition. This comes from London, so all these little, here you have everything. Now you have the compass, you have everything else. Now these symbols that then are used in the lodge, they are picked up. You know, you have, of course, you have. Let me see if I can take it out, but not easy because I seldomly take this out. But all the stuff is basically then symbolic of what? Of transforming the candidate. The candidate basically is received in front of a worship or master in the East who initiates him. And from that moment onwards, all these symbols that now we see here and seem just impossible to decipher, because we are, you know, here we have basically a micro. You have everything that basically you have in a lodge, but in miniature, and they all have their own symbol. You are initiated to the understanding of these symbols. You go through the initiation, and then you go through other passages, because the real initiation in Freemasonry is really only the first degree, and then the rest is a passage and a rise. You are past a fellow craftsman and then rise a master mason later on. Is symbolized by the position of the compass and the square, one over the other, on the Bible, in the proceeding of the lodge, because that is basically symbolizes where you are. In the first degree, you are put in one position in the lodge, then gradually you are moved to the other position in the lodge. What does this mean? It means that there is operated on you a transformation. So the initiation process is followed by a routine that then you go into when you are a Mason and you participate to lodge meetings. Then when they see that you're fit, you are passed to the next degree. Eventually you arise to Master Mason, which is in theory the highest degree. Then after that, if you are invited, you can join the rites of choice, okay? And here in the US, the most popular rite, of course, is the ancient and accepted Scottish rite that came to put together a series of mystery schools and of Masonic rites that preceded it, and became the #1 rite in America, together though with another rite that preceded it by a few years, which was the York rite, which is open though only to Christians. So that doesn't make it a universal rite, because the York rite basically goes back to the Christian origins of Freemasonry. So all this to say that basically we are following a system. This system was actually born as a Christian fraternity, and I explain all this, as you know, in my book. Right at the beginning, I discuss in my book how the crafts Mason how they originate maybe in ancient Rome, how they become speculative Mason, how then they get infiltrated though by the dark side. And Freemasonry, from being a Christian fraternity, gradually becomes something else. And after 1813, after the union of the ancient and the moderns, it opens up to all kinds of beliefs. And from that moment onwards, we can say starts really the takeover by occultists, by non-Christians of this fraternity. So I wanted to explain all this in my book, and I think I did a good job in explaining the secret beliefs, the practices, of course, of Freemasons and the Illuminati, what is differentiated them, and also why all these practices eventually got corrupt, because we are unfortunately living in an era in which Freemasonry doesn't, personally, I don't go into the lodges of Freemasonry here in California, because I see it as an institution that has lost its original Christian imprint and has become something different. I mean, I've been invited to their lodges here. I can show you. I have many, I studied many of their publications that they were kindly given to me to, but sadly enough, I saw that the lodges of Freemasonry today, either they are too superficial and have nothing to do really with the alchemy that initially should have crafted and perfectionated a human being and made it into a better man, while instead now it's the occultists that groups like the OTO that have taken over the show in some lodges, from other sects or groups, even external to Christianity, Muslim groups and so on, have made possible from this fraternity that has opened up after 1813 to the whole world of religion, meaning that as long as you believe in a supreme being, that's it. But then that here has been interpreted even to the extent of accepting Satanists because they believe in Satan, so they believe in God. So I mean, it's kind of like, and that really where we see that the corruption of the Western initiatic system has really led astray this whole Western initiatic system. So I try to explain in a nutshell, as we don't have much time today, how these people who had put together a system based on alchemy, because Freemasonry, like I said, is about transforming a human being. Alchemical transformation is not some matter of chemistry. It might have been promoted as such. It might have been perceived as such. It was actually in the past, when there was no structured chemistry. It was part of a belief that if you were a scientist and you were dealing with things of nature, you had also believed in God. And so it all reflected in the kingdom of God. When they broke these two things, chemistry became simply a physical chemical thing, then it they detached it completely from the spiritual. They didn't want you any longer to know that maybe a particular element in your hand or in your body is connected to a planet or to a particular planetary influence or to a peculiar spirit or whatever. You understand? Instead, in the past, so I would say that Freemasonry was built by alchemists to perfectionate mankind. Unfortunately, those alchemists ended up not being able to defend their creation. And gradually their creation was used for other purposes that have nothing to do with the original purpose. So then it became a social club for some people, most people. It became instead an occultist, a place where we could promote maybe a bunch of occult theories and stuff. And that, of course, was prevalent, especially in the initial phase when Illuminism arrived. And people thought, okay, this is the age of reason. But at the same time, the age of reason wasn't really born amongst people who really believed in reason. That's the crazy thing about the age of reason, is that, yes, there were people who gradually built around reason all their belief system. And that's why today we are in this mess, because this is the society of reason. Everything, you know, reason, and it has to be proven. Everything has to be proven.
Trust the science.
By science, by hard fact science. Now, hard fact science, I mean, one of the most important science that people don't really know about, that is used by all these people, is comportamental science. The science of the act of how people react. And this is a topic, of course, for another discussion. I haven't included in this book, and we might discuss it in the future. But in this book here, I explained how the Masons in their lodges discussed alchemy when it was still discussed. Let's remember that a guy like Count Cagliostro, who was a very important figure, which I always tend to discuss in my books, also because he is a relative of mine. So in a way, I like it to bring up, but it's not only because he was a member of my family, but he was a very important figure, a pivotal figure, a central figure of Freemasonry in the 18th century. And he was basically, he had constituted a rite that was truly magical and alchemical, that didn't hide that magic and that alchemy. It made it obvious what he was doing. Well, instead, but it didn't really go along very well with the system, and especially with the Vatican. He ended up being arrested, and he died in prison as the last victim of the Inquisition. But he also had initiated Napoleon Bonaparte. He had started a revolution that ended up influencing people like Benjamin Franklin, who was the worshipful master of a very important lodge in Paris. that was following the teachings of Cagliostro. Crowley himself said he was the reincarnation of Cagliostro and Eliphas Levi. So I tried in my book to explain also a little bit about the involvement of Cagliostro, also with the birth of the rites of Memphis and Mizraim, his involvement with the Jesuits, with the Knights of Malta, and his involvement with the Illuminati, because he was given actually by the Illuminati a very specific role and mission during a pivotal time, a turning point in history, which was preceding the Great French Revolution. I mean, which without the French Revolution, the history of mankind would have been very different. And so we have, of course, the American Revolution and the French Revolution that in some way are interconnected. And there is a system which, of course, behind the scene made of initiates. And so I think that this book will make people understand more about these connections. I mean, the fact that in 1776 we basically started our own republic here has also a reason, and I explained that, as you know, in volume 7 of my Confessions. But if we want to go even deeper in the understanding of all these secret societies, go no further than volume 5, because it's definitely a very interesting book. I also talk about Swedenborg, Emanuel Swedenborg, which is a very important figure who lived between 1688 and 1772, was a Swedish scientist, philosopher, theologian, and mystic, influenced very much Freemasonry, and the Swedish Rite in particular, but not only. And he's best known for his book on the afterlife, Heaven and Hell. But also, I discuss his role as a spy. And then I talk about Edgar Cayce, for example, also. So definitely a very rich book in which there is a lot of history. And there is those elements that might bring you to a deeper understanding and knowledge about the teaching, the practices of these people, and why from something that might have actually helped mankind, the whole thing shifted into something instead that it's satanic and doesn't help mankind. So I think that I gave you pretty much an explanation today about what this book is about. I mean, it is not a small book.
It's not a small book.
Not a small book. So, you know, to actually kind of explain it in only an hour is probably impossible. But I wanted to also explain the connections with the Freemasonry and the Vatican. What happened, of course, with the connections that there are between Freemasonry and one of the most important moments in the recent Vatican history, which is the Second Vatican Council, which I often talk about. And I also discuss some more contemporary topics, because this book has an extra amount of pages, which I included right at the beginning of the pandemic, to explain why this pandemic was coming into fruition, as well as trying to explain also the role of the Vatican and into also sabotaging Trump. And how Trump was actually a threat to this a globalist plan that, of course, sees also the involvement of the Rothschilds. So I think I gave you a whole perspective. If you have another question or two, I can answer.
I was going to say, because I know I've already kept you 10 minutes longer. I have two questions, but I guess I'll focus on one.
Okay.
And it's kind of I believe to be the culminating crux of volume 7 about the system of total control, right? Cyber Satan, which obviously you talked about in volume 6, but volume 7 about VR, about the manifestation of demons through digital technology and prevalence and through virtual reality. To go back to the beginning of this episode, talking about the dream state, the suggestive kind of unconscious where you give in and you are no longer in control. Do you think that that is the end goal of a VR virtual reality cyber world? In a sense, that is, it's sort of bringing the dream state to the masses, and that because to you have to sit down to meditate, you have to actually do it, versus VR, once you're locked in or you get in, you are very much, because what is it? It's the same thing. It's, you're in a world that you don't control. And do you think that that's the end goal, is to slip as many people into a form of digital dream state so that they can have total control? And then again, at the beginning of volume 5, you talk about their desire for sacrifice, not of animals, but of people, right? Of particularly young women, but of innocence, right? And that's how they can sort of extract that power into themselves, that do what thou wilt. Is that the end goal of it all? To download man into a digital world, which in a way is like meditation. You have to voluntarily go into it. And then once you're in there, it's just a feast on souls. And I know that sounds insane, but I'm just trying to look at the big picture. Do you think that's what it is put as many people into VR, that's a digital dream state, and
Yeah.
thus the most sacrifice?
I think that might in part be the truth, but here we are talking about basically giving to this world more and more materialism and less real spirituality, because VR is about a state that might mimic, for example, a church. You will enter a church in VR and you will be mimicking the entrance in a church. They will even mimic probably God, angels, demons. Everything can be mimicked and, of course, projected in your head at that point. And it's about control. It's about lowering the frequencies of man that bring us in contact with the angelic realm, with God. So here we are, not only in a society that wants people caged by a virtual reality, but also it's constantly giving, in the last decades, more and more frequencies through the mediums of TV, music, cinema, frequencies that lower and ruin our consciousness, project chaos, and of course, ultimately lead you to being demonically possessed. Now, we made already some of these references when I talked about the volume 6.66. So definitely, when you talk now about the fact that they want to cage people into that kind of reality, let's not forget that the moment in which they will start inserting things in our body, that is really where they will have complete control, not the VR necessarily, because we can take out the VR. Okay, it's going to be difficult for some people. It's going to be difficult. Some people will not be able to say no to the VR, as they're not able to say no to the TV, as they're not able to say no to the computer or wherever, their phone. Most people nowadays, they go around, they're caged into their mobile phone. Their mobile phone will be inside themselves within 10 years. And so that is really where they are leading to. Then it doesn't matter if you are in or out of the VR. It's about connecting you to the machine and enslaving you. So that might be, of course, through the VR, but it might also be through simply having a microchip inside you and controlling you. So I don't know if I explained myself well.
You did. No, you did. It's like I think the Native Americans used to do it. They would they'd find like a basin, almost like a valley with really high walls. And once you got to the edge of the cliff, what they do is they'd build like mud walls, almost like 1,000 feet. And they would get shorter and 10 feet, 9 feet, 8 feet, all the way down to where they rose right to the ground. And what they would do is they would lead animals, they'd stampede them into this long tunnel, and it's gradually getting bigger and bigger. And then they go into the walled off area. And then what they do is they, dump a stone and block it off, and then they could slaughter them. It seems like that's what it is.
I mean, they will, like I say in the book, proceed into giving the idea that we are achieving new powers, that we are basically moving into a concept of a one world, and that is when they will unite religiously, politically, economically, and socially this planet to pave for the appearance of the Antichrist, the false Messiah that they will promote as being the ultimate controller. You see, the thing here is it's very clear here that in the United States, they have already understood that to embrace this kind of system, they will have to make some radical changes. And that's why, for example, one of the radical changes that is being addressed recently by Elon Musk is the age in which a president should become a president. Because that is also something that blocks this plan. It seems crazy, it seems unusual, but you have to understand that since ancient times, the elders have always been the sages, the ones that nowadays they want to ridicule the figure of the old through a president like Joe Biden. Okay. Joe Biden is the epitome of the village idiot, of the guy who is used and abused by the system behind him, and ultimately to promote the idea that old people are no good for our society and we need to get rid of them. We need to have new people like Zelensky, young. We need to be fighting. And so, the big experts from all those think tanks say, oh, we have a problem here in the US. We don't really have strong leaders. Will they appear in the future? And then they suddenly say, oh, well, but we have made a choice in the last few years. We don't want a leader. We want a team. We have basically Obama working with a bunch of people in the Oval Office, in the emergency room in the basement that he has downstairs when he was arresting or killing, I don't know, Osama bin Laden. They say it, but it wasn't the image of John Fitzgerald Kennedy on his own, with the world on his shoulders. It wasn't the image of a great leader that is fighting for his people on his own. It's a team effort. Team effort is basically communism.
Yeah, diffusion of responsibility. There's no one person.
Yes, and so that is something that is kind of clashing, though, at the moment, with their idea of bringing together a single world leader. Because if either you have a single world leader or you have a team. No. So now they kind of like working around it. But the first thing that I need to diffuse is let's delegitimize the older folks.
Yeah.
Oh, Trump is too old. Joe Biden, you see, it's I mean, it's ridiculous. The guy can't really hold the discussion. But they keep him there, and they will keep him there as long as they can, because they need to simply demonstrate that no longer we can have older people in charge. And that is very dangerous. That is very dangerous, because the older folk has the experience.
Yeah.
And it's not Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a case in its own. It's a case in its own. It's a guy who has lost it a long time ago. And for that reason, they are simply using him to remove from, and that's why Elon Musk is not to be trusted. Elon Musk is the guy who is working for the computer brain interface, is the guy who has warned over and over again about artificial intelligence, but at the same time is one of the main people involved in the construction of it. So it's kind of ambivalent, you know, this figure. So thank you so much for having me today. And I hope that people will understand that if they want to have a complete panoramic, a complete vision of these secret societies, well, look no further than volume 5, because then you will have a very also clear, I don't know if you noticed at the beginning of the book, I've included also a timeline.
Oh yeah.
Of how gradually
it all changed.
We got into this mess in the last couple of 100 years, and how basically they've been pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, and in the end, that's the result that we have is to. But you have to go back. You know, you have to go back. You have to know the past in order to really understand the present and write the future. And so we are here praying that America is taken back by the Americans. But at the moment, it looks like the people who constructed America from those secret societies in Europe, gave the original inputs, are now wanting to take what they helped creating for a purpose. Yeah. And it might be very difficult to say no to them. And so the United States of America, as united, is in danger. And we need to work to protect it. That's why you also need to, of course, get volume 7 of my Confessions, so you have also a full perspective regarding the ongoing Great Reset. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
God bless you.
Mr. Leo Zagami, thank you so much, sir. Volume 5, 6, and 7. I'll put the description, or I put the links in the description. Get them paperback, hardcover, or on Kindle. I'll put your website in there. And
I want to add, at the end of the summer, when I finish my new book, I would like to discuss it with you, as well as, of course, one more book that we need to discuss, which is volume 4, which is also a very important book, which we need to discuss in the future. But
4, 3, 2, and 1. We got to get them all in.
Well, of course, but first of all, I need, as you know, to finish my new book. Yeah. So that's why I have to leave you, go back to work.
Yes, sir.
And please have a great summer, all of you guys.
Thank you so much, Leo. I will send you an email. We will get back together in September. Looking forward to your next book. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your time. I'll send you a link to this episode when it's up. God bless you, Mr. Zagami. God bless America.